Welcome everyone at the next multi-network community sync. Today is February 19th. I copy pasted from the last week, but yeah, February 19th. I have two topics. As mentioned, I want to kind of carry on the discussion and kind of kick off the discussion on what Lionel kind of asking for is the ability to reference the resource claim in the pod network rather than auto created. And then out of that, kind of I got got me thinking on kind of how to handle like some sort of edge cases for I think for both the referenced object and the auto created one. If you have any other topics, please free to add them. I pasted the link in the chat, so you can do that. All right, so I think Lionel, to kind of highlight how I'm seeing what we need, is ability to disable the auto creation portion of what I was thinking initially of the resource claim template. And for folks that are new, this is part of the design that you can catch up on. So I don't want to go back. So here is the link. If you want to catch up on what I'm talking about, this is part of the design that we are kind of putting forward. So if you want to catch up on where we at with this, please read through this God doc, and it's open for comments. So it's still in draft phase. So feel free to just drop comments if you want to. Is that correct, Lionel? So basically, I want to reference an existing resource claim template. And I think this is where the first question, can we limit it to templates? Do we have to do resource claims directly?
Why would we limit it to templates?
I think it's because then the flow is identical, and with resource claim, there is a slight change in terms of where do you place the resource claims, at least in pod. That's one aspect. I think that's would be my main reason. I think.
And I think before this, I think there's still the question on how this auto creation would happen also, because you
Mhm.
were putting in the design document that there's um, the config, the device config,
Mm,
but I had the questions about the requests. So if we don't have the requests,
mhm.
then we lose the scheduling part. And I think that's why I was saying that maybe we should have pod network referencing resource claim template instead of pod network embedding the some of the resource claim fields, like configuration field, for example.
Share this. I'm gonna share the design for a bit. I think you are referring to. So request is right now what I was thinking is to have very straightforward, right? Like this, right?
Yes, but
Device place
i-
without the
i-
selector. You say without the selector, you are losing the scheduler? No, you shouldn't, right? That should be the straightforward. I want the count of this class device of this name, you specify the class, right? And I want one count of it. You say that
yeah,
won't
but
fly.
you don't have the selector, right?
What does the selector? Selector, I would imagine that's like a further specification inside that driver,
Here,
that class, right? Of what I want to have, right? Isn't it? I might be missing.
here,
So
it,
maybe I might be not fully aware of the DRA. Maybe this is where my gap is. Yeah, go ahead.
so you have the resource slice, or for remember if it's within this device class name. I don't remember. I have to check. But if you don't specify the selector, it will take
Mm.
any device in this resource slice.
Yeah, that's what I would imagine. Okay, and this is what I would what is and isn't that not enough, or do we need to have because and I'm just drawing like a simple case, right? I have a Mac VLAN interface. Let's represent that. I know that the cap is coming for that virtual representation, but let's go by that, right? My single device class will have only that. If I'm going to have IP VLAN, it's going to be a different device class, and I'm going to call you that. And then it's going to have its own resource slice and what's not. Won't that work? I know that you can clamp it. I assume, or maybe this is where I think you're going into, that you can probably combine them into virtual devices. And then inside that one resource, I can, with selectors, probably identify more detailed and more narrowed selection, right? I want IP VLANs, I want MAC VLANs, but I think I can abstract it out, right? And then simplify this. I can say you're going to have separate classes for each of those. You can have a CRV device, you can have a MAC VLAN, IP VLAN, so forth, right? And then I can simplify this. Is that not the same? So this is where probably our both lack of how, I'm not sure, at least mine, I'm not fully expert on the kind of resource slice and how that would work, but I would imagine the selectors are a more fine-grained ability to select within the specific device class, right? Whatever it is specified. But if I were make it more high level, then still should work, right?
I'm not entirely sure, and it's it's a bit hard for me to say about this now. But my concern mostly would be that we are instructing the way to use the array in a very specific way.
And that should be the case, right? Because we are want to address multi-networking, not the array. Let's make sure that's the point, because we are leveraging the array to address multi-networking, not the other way around. We are not using the array to you see that? Let's make sure that's because that's the point here, right? To have a standardized way to implement multi-networking, not the array or AI. AI probably as well, but this is where, or maybe not. This is where we need to focus on a specific approach for this. I agree with you. We should not limit on how this can be done by implementations. And this is where I want to give the ability to, you can specify your own template, right? And then you go, sky's the limit, right? Then you use all the array blows and whistles you wish to, and slice and dice your stuff as you wish, right? With some specific restrictions that I want to talk about of if you were to reference it, right? So this is the difference, Lionel, right? So either we fully automate and you don't care about that, but then your implementation is more, as you said, more restricted, or you go by, okay, you go by the reference ability, right? And then if you go by the reference ability, you use the array to full head content, right? Keep in mind then you need to weight your ability to what you're gonna provide, right? Because and this is where, okay, now let's move to the aspect of that. I didn't put anything here yet. That's why, because I wanted to first discuss. So I think the most important part I want to call out is why we're using the array before we go to the reference. The reason we use the array is to, when I create a pod network named net1, I go to the pod and reference net1. What does this mean is it's a one-to-one naming schema. And I think this is the one thing we definitely need to keep to, right? Whether we use the automated approach or we use the reference approach. And that means that we already have semi-reference to whatever you would create, because the name has to be exactly the same. So that's the first restriction I would like to put if you reference something. The pod network, pod network has to be named the same way as your reference template. That's one thing. And then if that's the case, the only variable you can specify is the namespace. Do you everyone seeing that, or am I maybe some drawing? So basically, if we are to have a, let me try here. I'm sharing this, right? Insert some drawing. What I want to say, if I have a network, pod network foo, right? And this guy has to reference a, we say it has to reference a resource claim template, and it has to be named as well foo. And basically, because the automated approach will do the same thing, it will auto create this guy, right, in the template that I showed, or you can create it yourself. The thing here is your resource claim, the resource claims are namespace. So I think this is where the bar. So this is in namespace bar, right? So how do I reference those guys? So basically, I would say this guy now has, and there are two options we can go, right? This guy either has namespace name, or has a namespace selector. I think the latter is slightly better because you can select multiple, right? I can create this in multiple namespaces, right? Let me say this. Sorry. This. Let me quickly sort this out a bit. You. This here. Foo bar and what's, I don't know. ZZZ, right? I mean, that doesn't matter, right? So with selector, I can select those two, right? With names foo. Thoughts? Then it's, I think the reference is very straightforward. You only select the namespace and then, or the selector, whichever path we take. And then it's up to you where you create. And this is where I think, Lionel, where if you reference a resource claim template, this is where you get hindered a bit, right? Because you either lock yourself to the namespace or multiple namespace, and then you have to replicate your stuff into multiple namespaces, right? I think that's the trade-off, right? Either we create it automatically and you don't touch it, or you have a driver that creates that for you, or yeah, depending on how you want to go about that. Your implementation has to go about that, how you create the resource claim templates then, right, for the user. And this is a trade-off of usability versus flexibility of configuration, right? Keep that in mind, right? Because we need to look at it from the point of view of the user, right? How I'm going to use this, right? Right now, we are designing this. We are fully aware of the resource claim template, how it looks like, how to create it. That might not be the case for everyone and in every case. So this is something that we need to be wary of on designing this, right? Because we need to kind of think about the user on how they're gonna use this, right? We are not designing this for ourselves only, right? Mostly yes, but there will be some, hopefully in the future, more users that's gonna try this out. So we must make sure this is kind of straightforward. So the automated ways for that, right? I just create a pod network and I have some instructions from the driver, simple ones to how to fill it up, and that's it, right? Or I can go the flexible ways where, okay, I reference the resource claim templates, right? I am maybe proficient in DRA, so I know what I'm doing, and I want to go that part. And I have a driver that does that as well. And then you go by that, right? So we have the two worlds kind of combined, and I think this is a way to go about the referencing. Thoughts? I'm not sure whether the silence is take it as in yes, that sounds good, or what you're talking about.
In both cases, you need to have a driver, a GA driver, right?
Yes,
So
that's yeah. That's
why?
given, right? Because then and keep in mind the let me just keep that one here a bit, and then I will go back to this guy just to kind of refresh this, because what would happen is right now I have a config and a driver class. Those two objects are right now required. But what would happen if we were to introduce the namespace selector? Let's say selector will be the approach. You have to have one of the two, either this two or the namespace selector. So you cannot have both, right? You cannot combine. So either you fully provide the template or we create it for you, right? So it's one of the two options of going on about this, right? So you can either have only config and driver class or the namespace selector.
So the selector will select the resource claim template that has been created by the user.
So this is up to the implementation then. I don't know. You tell me, Lionel. Because keep in mind, our role here is to leverage and provide the contact points with the array, not how the array is used, because this is where the implementation steps in. I don't want to enforce on, as you said, right? We should not enforce implementers on how to use the array. And I'm doing that with this, with the label, with this labeling. That's the trade-off, Lionel, right? You said, can we have the reference? But exactly that's what you're pushing on the user, right? If you select the label, you have to be instructed on how to create that, right?
Yeah, I understand.
Because keep in mind, for the user, the front end is pod network and pod by default, right? That's what I'm trying to make it as such, right? The array, the controller, all that is hidden for them. They don't care. The resource slice, all that is handled by the implementation. And we will talk here about some standardization of those so that they fit into this. But basically, this is where the buck stops for the user. User only creates pod network with the fields here from the instructions from the implementation. And the instruction can be create this resource template with these values and then reference it with the namespace selector, or select make sure you use those device classes for those purposes, and then it can have such configurations, right? So there is more rigid, right, where it's more you're more constrained on what can be configured because you have only one object where you configure it and you put it in a pod network. Or the other option is the implementation has their own approach on how to do that, and that they provided that instructions, right? So thoughts on the namespacing? Because I think the one aspect we need to preserve is definitely the naming schema, right? So that if I create my pod network foo, I can directly reference that in the pod, right? Yeah. Folks, any other comments on this? I think this way we definitely we would as well preserve the implementation part, because you end up with this resource claim template named the same way, right? So whether it's automated or manual, it's just the insights of the spec of the template is different, right? Either you created it by the driver specification or we created it by us, by our specification, right? So can I assume the namespace is a good idea? Silent. I'm taking the silence as a.
I mean, to me, it makes sense. There's part of me that says the namespace selector is flexible. I can't. It's like, okay, consider this in network attachment definitions. They're namespaced, but you also have this kind of thing where, okay, I'm gonna create like a bunch of these and you have kind of a scale problem. You might need to put it in different namespaces. I know people wind up having to do tricks, at least in OpenShift land, where we enforce this kind of namespace isolation. Like you can only refer to net attached Fs in the same namespace as the pod. Which we did to give flexibility for like how an admin
Right.
manages what people have access to. So certainly I can see like a parallel there on the namespace selector. Like maybe you do need to expose this to different tenants, for example, that you might have namespace. So I can see that. I think we could get
Keep in mind,
away
this
with
will be just one pointer here. Keep in mind this, that a namespace isolation is enforced by DRI from the get-go, right? There is no ability to reference resource claim from different namespace already. So that part is already there. That's why the automated approach will create then the object everywhere, every namespace in the cluster.
Yeah, that is
right?
actually nice scale wise. But then, yeah, the exposure of this object, right? Like, so if you're an administrator and you need to create this pod network for tenants A, B, C, and D, but not E, F, G, H, etc., right?
So on that note, what you're calling out, the kind of restrictions, I was thinking of that as well as a next step, right? To have allowed namespaces, right? So basically, instead of, and this is for the automated, because right now I assume what you're calling out, you can work around this by you creating the templates and you select them through the selector, right? But then for the automated approach, since today we would create everywhere, I was thinking of, and this is coming from exactly from Multusword, because it was there and I assume users would want to have that, where eventually there will be something like allowed namespaces, right? And this will be only applicable for the automated approach. Right, so basically this will be, I don't know whether it's going to be explicit names names of bar and then Z, or selectors as well. So I think that part should be handled by this. So you see that, Doug?
Yeah, I mean, that probably would kind of accomplish the same type of ideas that I guess I'm thinking of. But yeah, um, that probably would cover
So
it for me. But
the question here is, the selectors safe way to go about this? That's the question I want to kind of ask you. Should this be create in namespaces, like basic namespace names? Should this be just a list, explicit list of the names, and here bar and then Z? So maybe this should be a list and with explicit names, or should this be a selector? I think when you think about this name selectors or labels on a namespace, I think it's a high level privilege, right? Usually whenever I deal with Kubernetes cluster, I always have the admin. So I never had a limited, but kubectl to do. But I assume if you are, as you said, Doug, right? If you are a project, right, you would never have a ability to change labels on your project, right? On your namespace. Anyone kind of more experience with a product level like deployments in Kubernetes to kind of give us some feedback on that? whether we should go by namespace selectors or list of namespaces. All right, for now, I think I'm just gonna go by selectors because this is more Kubernetes-like, and see where that gets us with the selectors. And considering like namespace modification is kind of high privilege, that's my kind of reasoning.
I like it. I say go with that. If it causes implementation issues, we can rethink. But I mean, it makes sense to me.
Okay. Lionel, does that addresses the flexible approach for you?
But again, this is just to select where the resource claim template would be, right?
Yeah. Because then we assume the resource claims you create has to be there and named like this, right? And I assume we can, with the controller, we can call it out, right? And this is where probably my second bullet comes into play, right? How that kind of should behave. And there are kind of some various ways on how to validate, right? How to validate on should we wait and ensure that all the namespaces that I selected with the selector, it has to have the template. If I don't have it, then make the pod network non-ready, right? So there are those aspects. This is where my second bullet comes into my second topic to discuss on how strict we need to be around that aspects, right? Readiness for the pod network, right? But before we go there, and we can kind of discuss on how strict we need to be around that, if that should address that what you were looking for, right, Lionel? Like I can specify, I can link to a resource claim template. It has to be one. Yeah, I put one restriction. The name of the pod network and template has to be the same. And basically you can name it however, right? You can create your template, named something, and then create a pod network for that, right? So you can go other way around. It doesn't have to be pod network first, but then you have the capability to do that.
Okay, yeah, I understand. Yeah, it was this missing part, the last thing you said, that it has to have the same name. Yeah, I forgot about this.
Yeah,
I understand.
so yeah, this is important. Let me highlight this. Not border red. No, the red is bad here. Here and here. Yeah, the same name has to be there, right? And you can go both ways, right? You got to create first pod network or other way around, right? Okay, so I think this should. So that's the only, I think, with the flexible approach, the only thing I require is the pod network, and the templates has to be named the same. The rest is just, it's up to you, right? And okay, so now having said all this, as I mentioned, I want to kind of kick off to the other topic. Any other questions on this, on the namespace? If not, then I will just expand the design I was sharing
Sorry,
before.
Maciej,
Yeah, go ahead.
just one thing. I don't know, Lionel, will this conflict with the validation admission for the network DRA driver? Because that also uses some matching expression on the namespace selector. I'm trying to get my head around the device class selector versus the resource claim template selector and how that works. But if anything, I can come back later on with questions.
I think those are based on the resource slice, and those are all internal to DRA. They don't have any bearing. I don't think they have any bearing on, and correct me, Lionel, if I'm wrong, but I don't think those have any bearing against the standard label-based selectors, right, Lionel? So I know it's still both selectors, But keep in mind here, we are talking about label selectors on objects,
Yeah.
generic label selectors on objects in across Kubernetes API. And then I think the resource selector that Lionel is calling out is a further like cell-based expression onto kind of calling out some stuff from the resource slice. Is that correct, Lionel?
Yes.
Yeah, this is the requests or in the resource
Yeah,
claim.
exactly.
It's set expression to specify which device in the resource slice you want to claim.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this should not collide with one with the other machine. Okay. So I will expand the design with this to add that and mention this in the and expand the API as well to with this. All right. I think moving forward, so we have now two ways we can create the resource template, the automated, where the talk is the kind of idea is to create a pod network, and then the pod network controller will create the specific templates across all the namespace in the cluster. And I'm saying all, right? So that's today, that's the first implementation. The allowed namespace, I think for now I just want to reduce scope, but this is something the next step we can expand on and add to limit that, right? To only those namespaces. For now, everything, like just kind of keep it simple. And then we have the selector based, where I select specific namespaces, right? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, let me check that. My initial thinking on because the pod network has a status and has conditions, right? And I think main thing about these conditions is ready, and that's the only conditions I'm currently planning to have. Maybe there can be accepted, since we're gonna have the reference to another object, so make sure that's there. So maybe we can that might evolve. But right now, ready means the pod is correctly validated. DRA components are ready. Everything's set to true. This has an additional ability of extra conditions, so users can and implementations can add their own conditions to this. I am allowing that, and then if you set it false, this will true false. And the reason for this one, to have false, it will control, can I attach new pod to this? That's what the meaning of the ready is. And I think I had some implementation consideration here, but the driver should condition this. Maybe there is something that we could do, right? I was thinking maybe we can withdraw the resource claim templates if the object is false. This might be tricky with the now referencing how we do that, right? Maybe there is a way we can put some conditions on those user created resource claim templates. So there's something we need to look into. But basically right now, if the kind of idea is how to implement it is secondary, but the idea is, if the pod network is not ready, I shall not attach new pods to it. I should be blocked from doing that. How to block it, that's kind of secondary, but that's the kind of point, right? If it's not ready, I cannot attach new pods. And now, having that in mind, what is the conditions for readiness, right? And how strict we need to be around this. And the strictness is, for example, I created pod network foo, and one of the namespaces already have a template foo. So there is a collision. What do I do then, right? So right now in my text, I'm saying, if I find a colliding name, I will mark the pod network not ready and call out the namespaces where I found a conflict. And basically that means that if I cannot set up everything accordingly, you will not be able to create attach pods to that pod network, right? And this is very strict approach that I kind of come up with. And this is for the reason of how much user can break themselves. I think that's the kind of the answer we need to kind of ask here and answer on how much we want to kind of open users for failure, right? Because what else can we do is be not so strict. If I created at least one namespace, at least I created my template it at least one namespace, I will deem the pod network true, ready, true, because I have at least one where I can go about this, right? And then I'm less lenient. If I have one where I have a conflict, I don't care. I will set, let's say there will be some warning message or what's not, like either in conditions or in the controller logs, and that's it, right? But you can still be ready, you can still attach in those namespaces. The problem with that one for the user is if the user thinks about attaching the whole thing to in their cluster, and they think, okay, I can attach anywhere, whatever I want, they might end up and fail themselves because I think the main reason it will be because they created a pod in a namespace reference the pod network, but it's not what we think it's attaching to. It's something else because there is a conflicting template with the same name, and I'm attaching to that, right? So I am attaching to something that I don't even know what's that, right? So this is where we are opening the users for failure because they can do something like that, right? Or we just completely restrict that you cannot attach, and we say, yeah, you cannot attach until all the namespaces are set up. And there is another aspect to this, because there is easy way user could break themselves another way, right? Let's say our automated resource template, let's say it's gonna have this label, right? The ones that I'm going to create an automated way. And unfortunately, user came in and removed that label on one of the namespaces. What do we do then? Do we mark the whole pod network not ready? Because now my controller, since the label got removed, I have a duplicate in that namespace, right? And I don't know that who created this template. I'm not fully aware. So, you know, I probably gonna have owner reference, so I can go by that as well. In the metadata, there is an owner reference, so I will have that pointing to pod network. But let's assume user even deleted that, so they deleted the label and plus the owner reference, right? So I have now someone make a boo-boo and left a duplicated named resource template, which basically I created, but they messed it up for whatever reason, and then the whole pod network goes down because of that, right? Because we don't know, we own the object, so we cannot touch it, and now I cannot create it because there is already a duplicate name. So I will deem the whole pod network down, right? With saying that you have a duplicate there. And this is the side effect of being so strict, right? Thoughts? One way or the other, should we be very strict and basically make sure user is not opening themselves for failure? Or should we be less and be more lenient, saying that at least one? And I think this is boiled down as well to the namespace selector as well. If I have a namespace selector and I put two labels and I found the namespaces. If there is at least one namespace where I don't have the template pre-configured, I will deem the whole object not ready, right? Because if I'm very strict, if you selected these namespaces, I expect those to have the template. That's the strict approach. The non-strict approach would say, okay, I have at least one, then I'm good, and you can move on, right? So this applicable, that's why this is as well applicable to the namespace selector as well approach, the more flexible, because it as well, how strict I am, right? Should I just, if I selected, if I put selector that's too wide and it has multiple namespaces and I have not created the object over there, do I care that, and how should I deal with that? Thoughts? Or did I ramble and overcomplicated this, folks. Any opinion? Any questions?
I'm sorry, I must say. I mean, we need just a little bit time, especially how the whole DRA API, because I haven't seen the use of the label from the DRA perspective of how they handle the resource claim and the resource
So
claim
this is,
template.
and Mohsin, this is where, keep in mind, this is, I think, I owe explanation about the front end and back end stuff, right? That I think we talked last week. Whatever DRA, this is backend, and has no bearing to whatever I said, right? I think this is all about like usability of what we are thinking in terms of, because pod network is the front end and how user gonna interact with that, right? And where the pod network will be available, and this boils down to basically where the template is going to be created, because that's the user facing that's how we kind of implement the whole user facing stuff. So the DRA aspect on how then the selectors and all those work, I think this is secondary, right? At least from this point of view. I know for implementation, this is the main thing, but here from this point of view, this is secondary. Here we're just kind of calling out how we are going to behave with the pod selector, the namespace selector, and basically how we expect the template, where it should be available and how, right? I think if nobody has opinion, I prefer to go with the very strict approach as I initially wrote it down, to ensure that users don't break themselves. I think that's my thinking here, focusing on user on this point. It will be more cumbersome, but having proper status condition kind of visibility on saying, okay, those are the namespaces where I have conflicts, I think should be quite enough to kind of visualize that where is the gap, though it might be some bit cumbersome. I know that the kind of aspect I called out, like someone manipulating with the existing resource claims, is very rare. Someone has to be malicious here and do something on purpose to break you. I don't think user would do that, because as I said, that you will have two things. You will have labels and owners, ownership to the object. So this is how we would validate that something is mine or not. But still,
You mean, Machine, the labels is of importance to the pod network object?
right, only.
Yeah.
That's correct, because this is how this and ownership. So I need to probably add that here to the to this, but we will reference the whole thing via the owner reference field. I already validated. I think I had it somewhere. Where was it? Oh, I had it somewhere here. Garbage collection, right? I tried it out, and we can make all the resource claim templates to be childs of the pod network, right? Pod network can be cluster namespace, cluster space names, cluster scoped, and it can have childs in namespaces, and that works. And basically, if you delete this guy, this gets garbage collected as well. So so that works. I think this will not happening for the reference approach, for the flexible approach. Let's maybe call it like that, so it's easier to say. The flexible approach is we just point to that guy and we expect it in being there. We don't own it, right? So if someone deletes it, then we will say, oh, someone deleted that, and I'm not ready because it's not there anymore. So I will flip what we just recreated it or something, but yeah, that's, we will react on that, right?
Yeah.
Any other comments on the strictness? Okay, so let's, I will write it down maybe in the doc. That will give maybe in the design doc, give maybe some more highlight. Hopefully I can explain it better over there. So Yep. I think that's all I want to kind of bring up at that point. Any other topics? One more thing, I started writing the the CRD. Where is this? I can share this. So if someone's interested in following, I started implementing some of this. So there is an init, probably gonna rename it to POC, but for now it's in init. Something I pushed yesterday. So I have first version of the APIs itself. I am working on the controller, but the APIs is there, kind of the initial, let's say, skeleton for the kind of repo for the API. This will have it's currently empty. I currently have only the enabled field, but I will expand this by end of the week, probably with what we discussed with the namespace selector as well included. So I will expand it with all the spec, but beside that, oh, this one says this is a bug, so I need to fix this. It's not no accepted. But yeah, I am going to, yeah, this is where I'm gonna push my POC stuff at. Let me link this. This is, oh yeah, 3 init. Okay, this is here. So if someone's is interested in the following this, then feel free to grab that. I am going to create a controller against this repo, and I'm going to use some replace what's not on to be able to import this to my other project. So you will be able to see in a controller how you can import that to your controllers or any other stuff. There is a Go has ability to replace things, so you can import something from somewhere else, even though the name is different. Yep, that's a bit of a progress on this one. So eventually, hope maybe by end of the month, I will be have a controller with what we just discussed here, with the basic like control plane capabilities, right? Creation of the templates and basically how the pod network behaves, right? Without at least the device implementation yet, the driver. Okay, any other topics? Going once. Yeah, Machine.
One final question, Maciej, just the resource claim template.
Mm-hmm.
Did you mention that will be auto-generated or
So
from, yeah.
Auto-generated
today,
unless it exists, right? That's what we talked about. Just I'm
so
checking my
unless
own
you
understanding too.
you will have ability to do this. So right now, let me maybe clean this up a bit. So we are not going with this one. So you would go with device. Oh, no, don't do that. Device class name. And then there was a config field, right? So you specify those configs. Or this is not there yet. Or you provide an namespace selector. So those are the options. I'm going to expand the API with this field, namespace selector. And basically you specify either your stuff here, which is auto-created approach, or you'd select to a pre-created one that you own. That when I mean by you, the implementation owns.
Yeah.
So yes, you can. You will be able to point to an existing resource claim, right?
No, one of the reason I ask about if auto-generated or can be created by the users as well, it's in case, for example, the user would like to change the allocation mode in the resource claim template. But yeah, we can take it in next meeting. I can try to outline a little bit on some of those thinking. It's more how flexible the resource claim template can be. looking actually just the network devices, nothing else.
Right.
And
I think
also, yeah,
in the I'm not sure how you can change the. I see the template might be annoying here, but I think this is why Lionel was calling out. Maybe we can point to a claim directly, because then maybe we can do that resource claim as well. I'm not sure whether template to stick to the template, or does it matter, because then you have to change your pod experience, right? As I mentioned, right now the pod reference is in the resource claim template, and there is 2 separate fields for either resource or template, right? Is that a big deal? Maybe that's a smaller aspect, right? But then it's keep in mind that's a burden on the user, right? Because definitely we cannot automate the creation of resource claims directly, because this is just one per pod. So that's something that's kind of too strict, too limited for the automated approach, right?
exactly.
Yeah, so that's why I want to stick to templates. I think maybe in the selected approach, that's fine. Then I can have different capabilities per resource claim, and then within the namespace, I can, as you said, right, I can mix and match with my per pod configuration, right? I see that aspect kind of being very strict, right? Yeah. Because I think what we are missing here, and to call out to what you're saying, in our approach from last year, I think I still have it here, yeah, in this PR and this readable, if you want to read through that, what we had in mind last year, we have been introducing network attachment, or yeah, it was, I think, called network attachment. Let me see. We have pod network and pod network attachment. Sorry, share this tab.
Yeah, I think
Pod network attachment was the per pod configuration on a per pod level. Pod network was the more global, and then per pod configuration was pod network attachments, where you could have more, maybe that wasn't explicitly per pod, but you can sub configure your pod network, right? Pod network would have a high level, and then pod network attachments will have more granular, small changes to the pod network global, right? I think that was the kind of the thinking about the pod network. If I think, do I have a picture here about the dependencies? I think I had some picture. Yeah, this one, right? So pod network could have multiple pod network attachments, right? And then pod could have either pod network or pod network attachment, but then I can have multiple. And we are right now not specifying this pod network attachment in the current approach. I just want to call this out, right? We are losing this pod network attachment as it stands today. For now, I want to keep to that. Maybe we can expand this in the future. And I assume the resource claim is kind of the pod network attachment replacement.
Yes, yeah, of course.
Right. Keep in mind that I think pod network attachment was, as you can see, 0 to many. So I can have multiple pods attaching to the pod network attachment. Resource claims, it's not that. It's always 0 or 1. It's maximum of 1. You can have only one pod pointing to a resource claim. If I'm not mistaken, Lionel, correct me if I'm wrong here.
Yes.
No, you can have multiple pod pointing to the same resource claim.
Oh, I can?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So no, I'm wrong here. So I think then maybe we can start looking into resource claim on how to kind of replicate this picture here, right, as well, on having that kind of capability, right? Because the one to many is right. The resource claims, if anything, points to one. If they have from template, right? They only from template they will point to one pod template, which is a pod network, right? So maybe we can recreate this, though it might get more complicated, right? Because then we are the resource claim. I'm not sure whether we introducing pod network attachment then and do this, and then we create a resource claim out of that. Yeah, this is something that it will get more complex if we were to follow this, right? Right now, keep in mind the current design does not introduce this, and it's more straightforward. All right, I think we can continue that discussion. Let's maybe bring this up next week and carry on if how we feel about adding this guy. Okay.
Sure. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
See y'all. Bye.
Thank you as well. Bye-bye.